It's no secret that writing can be lonely work, but does it really have to be? Whether you're full-time, part-time, or just starting out, you'll get insights into the tricks, tips, and production habits of writers from every level of the biz. From best-selling authors to those launching their first novels, you're sure to be in the company of friends as we encourage great writers to divulge and share their secrets.
This is the Great Writers Share podcast with your host, dark urban fantasy author, Holly Line.
Hello and welcome to episode number 69 of the Great Writers Share podcast, a podcast where every week we hijack an hour or so of time from some of the kindest and hardest working writers around today to join us on the show and discuss everything that makes them tick, roar and bounce. My name's Holly Line and it's the 2nd of January 2021 as of recording. So, my personal update. I've been enjoying a bit of a break over the festive period, playing lots of games and chilling out with my family. However, like many writers, I seem to have an aversion to complete rest, so I have also been planning out 2021 and keeping my toes in the pool of podcasting. As I start getting back into work now, I'm going to be working on what was previously known as the Nightmare Project, but on Dan's insistence, I have to stop calling it that. I'm trying to cultivate a more positive relationship with that work in progress. It's actually a passion project. It's a bit different from what I've written before. It's more personal and introspective, with much less action and fighting. So I'm not quite sure where it sits in the market, and I haven't quite figured out where the story needs to start. So I need to figure that out, and I need to stop worrying about how I'm going to sell it and just write the story that's inside me and wanting to come out. And that's my challenge for January. Now onto our question of the week. Over on Facebook and in our Slack group for patrons, I asked, how have other forms of storytelling affected your writing? In the Facebook group, Edwin said, I've used game simulation systems to help choreograph action sequences, both on the immediate scale and on large-scale battle actions. For fine details, I have play-acted the specific action to get a feel for how it should look before writing it out, which I love. Samantha Wright says, this question reminds me of Laura's movies that shaped my storytelling that she does on Instagram. I highly recommend checking it out, and I second that. Laura's Instagram posts are fantastic. Sam goes on to say, I guess I'd say that for me, TV and film shaped my view on visuals and dynamic. So when I write, I find myself looking through that lens a lot. I am exactly the same. I am very visual in my writing. And Laura says, fan fiction for me has been a cornerstone of my writing and I cannot recommend it enough. Allowing yourself to play in someone else's world where the blocks are already there can really help you experiment with your writing. I was part of the RP community on Tumblr for a long time too, and that taught me a lot. You had to be a master of a lot of things on there. Graphics, website design, storytelling, bio writing, advertising, pitching. It also teaches you to develop a thick skin. Though I've had some brutal comments online, I've also had some amazing positivity and people enjoy my work. It not only gave me confidence, but it really grounded me in the belief that you have to believe in yourself. Absolutely true. On Slack, Yanni said, I love movies and television series. I love watching how they work through the story and the beats, even if I can semi-predict what's going to happen. I take that as being on the storytelling level that I know what could or should happen. I've always been a visual person, so theatre, cinema, art, all of it inspires me. Dan said, I've rediscovered a love of games with stories to tell. And he lists some of the games that he's been playing, and they all revolve around solid storytelling that helps to inspire my work when I've grown tired of reading, which rarely happens, let's be honest. Absolutely. So thank you everybody for your comments. I'm sure you're going to love this interview with Chris Allen. He's a games and short fiction writer who I have known for years, and it was a great pleasure to sit down and talk in depth with him about his varied and exciting writing career. In the interview, we go deep into his experiences of designing and writing role-playing games, working on licensed lines and coping with the fans, and how his experience of working in the games industry shapes his enjoyment of the games as a player. Before we get into the interview, a great big welcome to our new patron, Victoria LK Williams. Thank you for supporting the show and welcome to the group. If you would like to be part of our Patreon community, you can join over at patreon.com/Great Writers Share, where for as little as $1 a month, you can get involved in our behind the scenes group, benefiting from early ad-free access to episodes of the show, join our private Slack channel, ask upcoming guests any of your questions, and get involved in our monthly Q&A, where all four of us get together to answer your questions and chat about writing. So if you like the idea of upping your author career and getting all of that good stuff, then one more time, that's patreon.com/Great Writers Share. And now, without any further ado, let's dive into the interview with the one and only Chris Allen. Chris Allen has written, edited and designed dozens of tabletop gaming products since 2005, including role-playing games, board games and miniatures games, and shows no signs of stopping anytime soon. He has contributed to major game lines such as The World of Darkness and Trinity Continuum, and worked on licensed tie-ins for a broad spectrum of properties including Starship Troopers, Babylon 5 and 2000 AD. His design work extends to live-action role-playing, where he served on the plot team for the major UK fest LARP Empire for several years. Chris is also a published short fiction author and is currently writing a tie-in novella for Trinity Continuum Aeon. Chris believes that tabletop games, albeit played increasingly via virtual tabletops, provide an important creative outlet for their participants and a different method of interacting with the resulting in-the-moment fiction to that traditionally provided by other forms of story media. Chris was born in Thailand, but these days lives in Bristol with his wife and 2 children. Welcome, Chris.
Hello.
So, a very quick background. Chris and I have known each other for many years.
Yes, good few years now, isn't it?
Yeah. So thank you so much for coming on the show. This is a real treat. But can you start by telling us a bit about your writing journey?
My writing journey. That's an interesting one because where does it start? There's some some aspects to game writing, for example, a bit different to fiction writing, and in terms of where that started on that, they kind of come from 2 different places. But for the game writing, for me, where did my journey start? My journey started when I was very small, and I had a babysitter who, as part of her things to entertain me, she made a fun little maze with grid paper and pen, and she ran me through this maze of tricks and traps and monsters as a fun game, which was the first introduction I ever had to a very basic form of role-playing games. When I was probably 7, a cousin of mine gave me, and I don't know if you remember these yourself, a fighting fantasy game book. Caverns of the Snow Witch, and I was entranced by that. First ever sort of real one of those that I came into contact with, and I absolutely loved it. I consumed an awful lot of those as a kid. There was I remember a rack of books in the local bookshop I used to go to as often as I could with my pocket money to get another one of those when I'd saved up. That then moved me into gaming, other forms of role-playing games and as a teenager, and that then developed into writing in game terms about, when I was 18, there was at the time a bit of a shift in the games market. The traditionally published, the big name role-playing game Dungeons and Dragons, which obviously a lot of people have heard of, especially today, had changed ownership and was having a new edition published by a company called Wizards of the Coast. And as part of that, they opened it up. They opened up an open license for people to create material to go along with that game. When I was 18, I started producing, fan material for that kind of thing, and I had my first work published by a company called EN Publishing in 2004 or 5, or there or thereabouts, and then that moved into working at a company called Mongoose Publishing as an editor and then designer writer, and since then it all sort of it's all gone on, snowballed from there. My more conventional writing journey has been a little bit different. It's intertwined with the game writing very much so. I'm a big fan of fantasy and science fiction and speculative fiction, that kind of thing, which is often very core material for inspiration for role-playing games and the like. But I didn't do an awful lot of independent kind of short story writing or anything while younger. I remember writing at school some sort of fantasy fiction or science fiction things as part of writing as well. I was given free choice of what to do in a writing assignment. But it didn't really turn itself into fiction writing independently so much for me. I was channeling a lot of that creative energy into things like the role-playing games I was running, which obviously for yourself, Holly, I ran a group with yourself in it, and then sort of sideways into the game writing. When about 7 years ago, I suppose, I was made redundant from a job in an insurance company just about the time I was getting married, about to get married to my now wife. And I had several weeks at home with absolutely nothing to do. And an incredible amount of creative energy bottled up after having been working at an insurance company for a year and for the civil service in the Department of Work and Pensions for a year before that. And that was the first time I wrote a sort of novel-length work. It just sort of came out over the few weeks. I was knocking out between 3,000 and 8,000 words a day, and bam, there's this whole manuscript length work. And while that's not something I've gone back to, I have since then started doing more fiction writing, and started to get things published on that kind of front, and then started to intertwine that with the game writing as well. So the game journey now for me, the writing journey has brought game writing and sort of fiction writing together to the point where I'm writing tie-in fiction for games and the like as well, which is a development I'm quite happy about. I'm really excited to see where it takes me next.
Yeah. So you kind of hinted at where the game writing came from, but can you elaborate a bit more on that? I mean, how did you start getting published by the big publishers?
Well, there's a bit of the industry, the role-playing games and tabletop industry is an odd duck, and it's changed quite a lot over the decades. So what happened with me then is a bit different to how it is now. But because this, as I said, was the rise of this open license for writing tie-in material with Dungeons and Dragons, overnight a booming industry sprung up producing what was called third-party material for the game, and players and people running games were snapping this stuff up. And it's a slightly it's one of those situations where I kind of had I suppose eyes bigger than mouth kind of situation where I was going to write a short article about some steampunk gaming elements for a friend's electronic magazine they were doing at the time. And they said, "Hey, Chris, you've got an interest in this stuff. Could you maybe write us an article?" Okay, cool. And I started writing an article. I didn't sort of stop. I kept on expanding it, and I rapidly became aware that what I was writing wasn't an article; it was a whole book, essentially, which became Steam and Steel, which I wrote. And then I thought, what the hell am I going to do with this now? To my fortune, I went to a chap at Ian Publishing at the time who was one of the people who's handling submissions and the like. And I said, I've written this book. Do you want to publish it? And to my amazement, they said, "Well, actually, yeah, we think it's quite good." Writing this kind of game material is a bit different to writing a book. This was I don't know how many tens of thousands of words it was, but it's a bit more, I suppose. What's the word? Sectioned down in terms of what you're writing. You're writing subsections of different things. I find it very easy to write large amounts on that compared to fiction, which requires a lot more planning and thought in terms of an ongoing flow. So I had this book, and luckily had them pick it up. That then got me some other gigs with people who were interested in they were creating games with sort of Victoriana or steampunk themes, who headhunted me for that. After I left university, I was very lucky in that Mongoose Publishing, one of the new role-playing companies that opened up, was looking for new editors, and I applied and I got the job. That sort of moved me into doing editing work and layout and all sorts of other things relating to game production, and into working with licenses as well, and not just role-playing games, tabletop, miniatures games and board games as well. And so for me, that early stage was, to a certain extent, have my creativity kind of demanded to be made into something, and then I just shopped it around till I found someone who wanted to do something with it. I didn't. I had a bit of a lull for quite a few years when I was focused on other career aspects rather than writing, before I came back into the industry again. And how I got back in that time, after having not really been deeply involved with the community on the creation and industry side for a while, was a game called, which again Holly will be familiar with because it's something we played together. It's Wealth of the Forsaken, which was a modern horror game created by White Wolf, who created the World of Darkness games and all that lot. And at the time, second editions of these games were in the process of being created. And a friend of a friend was a developer on a different line. So they had some in there. They advised me to put in a submission. I submitted some material and got pulled in on the development team for the second edition of that game. And that then in the intervening years developed in terms of going from a junior writer brought in to help to a sort of senior writer being given more and more work, up to now a developer role with that particular company, which is Onyx Path Publishing, and then spreading my wings out into other companies, other freelance work as well, which is a mixture of people who are interested in the kind of work I've done before, who like my stuff, and just opportunistically watching for adverts for new roles, participating in the online communities where a lot of this discussion goes on now, and watching out for opportunities with new books or new projects that are happening, and just putting myself forward for them.
So you mentioned about working on the licensed properties, and you have in your bio, you mentioned Starship Troopers and Babylon 5. How was that experience?
That is very odd. Very odd. But because, a lot of the gaming industry is and has been for a while fairly, I'm not going to say low budget, but it's not big. But I mean, we're not talking about massive corporations. Apart from a few heavyweights, it's small companies doing work with these licenses. And my impression is, and I'm not saying about these particular ones, but in general, a lot of license holders who license games out for role-playing games have, in the past, maybe not so much today due to the growth of the industry, but in the past been sort of thinking it's a bit of a whatever, we're not that fussed about it. Someone wants to make a role-playing game, whatever that is, sure, we get some money and they get to go off their thing, which means you're not really working at kind of, it's not like working on a big computer game with a license, for example. It's a case of getting given some files with whatever, presumably the people at the other end have got in their standard box of graphical things for the lines and stuff, so on the one hand, you're kind of working with companies who are not, at least back then, they weren't always massively engaged, I suppose, with the creation of these lines, of these products, and working a bit on sometimes not the scraps of what they're offered, but it's not sort of them going massively out of their way to help you out. Combined with the other end of it, which was the legal teams and licensors who look very closely to make sure you are adhering to all the parameters of what their licensed products must look like, down to making sure you have the correct shade of black on the cover, not just any shade of black, but the correct shade of black, trade dress, standard formations, that kind of thing. In general, working with big licenses, I didn't really find that there was an awful lot of fuss about what you were putting in the product itself, as long as you were, sticking to what the general themes were supposed to be. With a lot of these things, you have writers creating entirely new material relating to a license, because they're trying to fill a role-playing game book with a bunch of cool stuff for people to use in their games. And that detail just isn't there in the licensed property as it stands, generally, because the writers of the show or the books haven't had to go into that kind of detail or catalog all that stuff. They don't care about it. So you have role-playing game writers making up the stuff whole cloth. And it was pretty rare to run into situations where someone at the other end would go, oh, no, we don't like what these 5 types of drink you've decided a bar in the Zocalo on Babylon 5 serves. They're not going to do that as long as you're not doing anything wildly egregious. That said, there are some notable exceptions in the history of role-playing games, like the West End games and the Star Wars role-playing games, which, as I understand it, basically became something equivalent to a setting Bible for the writers of later Star Wars media, where they then would get they were given books. They were given the role-playing game books for the new shows they were creating, saying, look, here you go, here's your reference material, because these guys have gone out and they've done all this detail for it, so we're referencing back to that. That's not the usual way it works out, though. So yeah, it's interesting. You kind of feel aware of the limitations on what you're doing, because at the end of the day, you are working on someone else. You're working in someone else's sandpit, and they are like to have very strong ideas of what goes on in the general shape of that. But there's a lot of stuff that's very flexible in how you portray and how you create new material and new fiction, if you like, around an existing source of fiction. It's interesting stuff. I think probably the most exciting one for me in a way was working. We did a re-release of the Thud board game for Terry Pratchett, and so that's one of the high points for my license work, because what I was doing wasn't very complex. In that case, I was just doing the layout for the box for the new edition, and we were doing some playtesting rules to make sure they actually worked. But it did mean that I got to see the artwork for Thud, the book, before most other people did, which was for a young lad not long out of university, and seeing the work of one of my big time favorite authors, having that, I suppose, that inside scoop of getting to see something like that was a bit of a real buzz.
Yeah. Oh, cool. So did you have to spend a lot of time devouring the original source material, or were you left pretty much to take your own interpretation?
Varied, and it varied quite a lot depending on the license and the nature of the writers or the work I was working with. We were doing, for instance, 2000 AD rebellions, the 2000 AD magazines, comics. We had some stuff ready to them. I think we had a role-playing game, and I was more involved with a miniature skirmish game we were doing about the gangs in Mega City 1 with Judge Dredd. And we had a massive stack of 2000 AD comics and magazines and graphic novels there as just physical reference material to go through. And that setting is gonzo. It is bananas. I was looking for a good image to put on the cover of a supplement, and I found a mutant guy with a chicken head for some reason. I don't even know why. Like that's going to be my cover for the book, So that felt like diving into a treasure trove. You pick up this backlog of weirdness, and you didn't know what awesome thing you were going to pull out. Whereas, I think some things like Babylon 5, for example, when the work I was doing as an editor on that, I was really relying a lot on writers who were very immersed in the lore and the fiction and the media, but at the same time we had limitations there on the artwork we could use, because we were using frames. We were largely using stills and frames from the show for our artwork in the books, and if we didn't have a good still or frame of something from the show, we couldn't do artwork of it, which put a sort of reverse limitation, a practical limitation on what we could put in the books and how we could illustrate it. Writing is a massive part of games, no doubt about it, but the graphical element is huge. The visual element, the artwork is massive, really important for a lot of people who consume these products and who enjoy these works of fiction. And it is slightly odd to go, well, the only artwork we've got of this is a very blurry picture in episode 3 of season 2. It's just we can't stick that in a book, and we don't have any way of getting any other art within the limits of how the art for this product is being done. So there was that element of really needing to get to grips of the limitations from our point of view in respect to the fiction and the lore as well. So it's interesting in that respect that it required a lot of familiarity with the source material, but it also required an awareness of what we practically could implement from it as well.
Did any of the work influence your enthusiasm for, like Babylon 5?
Yeah, not always in a good way, because to a certain extent, sometimes if depending on how heavy the workload is, you can burn out, and what you're doing as work can become work, and it can stop being enjoyable so much. There is the 15th time you've checked over a draft, fiddling with little pictures of these bloody spaceships from some bloody IP with some stupid thing, and you're like, I don't care about this anymore. I just want this book out the door. I never want to see one of these guys again. With miniatures games, when you're having to get miniatures battered back and forth, and things go wrong with that. Things come back from factories gone horribly wrong. There's lots of ways that it can influence you, and so some of that's from the problems you run into, and some of it's just oversaturation of yourself with a particular IP. There comes a point where you feel like not just that you know it inside and out, but you don't want to know it inside and out anymore. It's just it can drain the magic out of something a bit if it's a day in, day out workload in that respect. So yes, and not always positively would be my answer.
Yeah. Does a bit of time and distance from a project restore some of the magic? Yes, it does. And that's twofold. I mean, that's partly due to working environment and distance from the thing itself. If you are in a very stressful work environment, as I was back then, where we were producing very high rates of material in it, because the role-playing game market had exploded, and there was ravenous appetite for this material, and we were producing loads of it, so we were working very hard and working very fast, and that added to burnout with some of it. But also the distance it's twofold. I mean, I don't know about you, but when I'm writing fiction, sometimes I write fiction and I can't touch it. I don't want to look at. I've done this and oh god. One of the real pleasures I get these days with role-playing games is I write my drafts, I put them in, I send them in, and I'm like, and then I come back to them, when the book's released. And I can see, especially with lovely art, some artist has done amazing art, and I read through it and I go, you know what, this actually isn't bad, is it? I actually feel quite keen about this again. Reading my own stuff sometimes revitalizes me as well, and other people's excellent contributions as well. And that bit of distance really does help, I think. But also just having a slower work. I've these days my output rate is lower overall in terms of products published, somewhat lower, but it's much less intensive. It's much less, much less wearing out. So I'm at less risk of that kind of burnout as well. How do you cope with fan reactions?
Oh God! So role-playing games are notoriously bad for their fan communities. That's a bit unfair of me, because they're also notoriously good. You get fantastic fan communities, you get fantastic fan interaction. To some extent, the steps between a role-playing game designer and writer and the person on the forum saying this is good or bad is less than in some other industries. Some games have notorious fiction fan communities around flame wars about the most ridiculous things, some of which I have and am working on at the moment. And there's a couple of ways. I mean, firstly, you can just not deal with it, like I sometimes do, by which I mean I end up going, oh God, I'm going to release this book and they're going to hate it. These guys are going to hate it because I've changed it from how it used to be, and these guys are going to hate it because I haven't changed it enough. That is a genuine concern with a book I'm writing on at the moment, which I can't really talk about due to NDAs, but it has a very vocal community who are not shy of letting their opinions be known, and and it's a problem. And in this day and age of social media, it can be a real problem. The reactions sometimes on Twitter they're miserable, and it's not always unfair. It's not always unjustified. People get very passionate about these things, and they're often vocal because they care. But at the same time, let's face it, a lot of social media interactions and communities these days, they have a very unhealthy segment as well, and that is a part of the fan community interaction with role-playing games, war games, board games. Some of my colleagues, I mean, they are just like water off a duck's back. They go, there's nothing you do about it. Whatever you do, people are gonna be. Someone was going to be angry on the internet about it. You just have to learn to laugh it off and go, well, I'm the person who's making this, and you're not. You're the one in the position getting angry about it. So hey, who's doing better here? I like to interact with fan communities, and some of the ones I'm involved with are great. And I like to talk about problems fans have with products, so that we can kind of improve them and do better. Which does run the risk of getting caught. Now I'm lucky. I'm a white guy. I'm not, a white straight guy. So it is very noticeable that my colleagues who are women, people of color, queer, etc., get a lot worse than I do. It's simply an unfortunate element, even in a lot of the communities now. But even for me, it can be daunting, shall we say. So how to deal with it? Sometimes you've got to be correct. You've got to be tactical about the segments of the communities you don't listen to or you cut yourself away from for your own health and well-being. I think it's good to interact with the fan communities that are healthy and cultivate a good relationship there so that you can get a good feeling for how they're feeling and why they're feeling. And often I've found that people, maybe they respond not so well to something immediately, but you engage with them and they rapidly diffuse because they realize actually you had a reason for what you were doing. Role-playing games and things like that do have the advantage that it's not, what's in a book is for you to use at the table in your games and change as you see fit. So you can say, hey, if you don't like it, that's fine. And here's why it's not a problem if you just change it, which is a bit harder if you've dumped down a huge novel. You can't say, just ignore the middle thirds, guys, if you don't like it, So there's that kind of, it's about healthy interactions, and I suppose trying to more figure out the models that you follow in that respect on things like social media, and sometimes being ready to just walk away from the online flames and look after yourself as well.
Yeah. This is a bit of a tongue-in-cheek question. I hope you'll take it the right way. Aren't you basically being paid to write fan fiction?
Everyone who writes is ultimately being paid to write fan fiction, aren't they? I mean, what is J.R. Tolkien's works but ultimately a bunch of mythic fan fiction? So, yeah, anyone who writes is being paid to write fan fiction, except what we're doing is less fan fiction and more giving the tools for other people to create their fan fiction in the moment. While I do write fiction pieces for some of these game lines, a lot of what we're writing is setting and game mechanics designed to give the optimum experience in play for a theme or a concept, whether that's horror or fantasy or adventure or epic science fiction or whatever. But with a role-playing game, the levels of the fiction that you're interacting with are a bit different to writing a book, because obviously, on the one hand, we're writing a book, but it's not a novel. It's not a sort of a conventional fiction piece. We're doing a bunch of research. We're building a game. And that game has to be tested, it has to be played, it has to be make sure all the mechanics, in many ways it's a machine. The machine is made up of fiction and it's made up of narrative and it's made up of things. We're trying to make sure the whole thing functions and operates. And there is that element of interaction with the fiction at the writer level. We are then giving it to people to use, and often a role-playing game, for example, has a someone called a games master or a storyteller who's going to run the game for some other people, and that person interacts with the fiction and they start to take what we've given them, these recipes we've given them, if you like, and they start to use it with their preferred ingredients, and they start to interact with a new form of the fiction when they build something they're going to use with their group. So let's say you're playing a modern horror game about vampires, and we've given you this book about how to play an awesome game, modern horror with vampires, and the person who's going to be the games master for that is then going, right, what are the components I want to put in this? I want to set it in this city, and these are some of the themes I want to pull out that I think my players are going to think is awesome. We've got one guy who loves the sort of blood and splatter, rip and tear, so we're going to have that splatterpunk gore element in there. We've got this one person she's really into the investigation, so I want to get in that sort of horror, but murder investigation stuff. And they're pulling all these pieces and they're building in their mind, and they're building in front of them in their notes or their theoretical out of the game a fiction of their own. That then goes to the gaming table, and this is something which a lot of games will call, if you like, the fiction really for gaming, is what happens at the gaming table. What happens when you put a bunch of people playing their characters, pushing their ideas, exploring this narrative space that is unfolding in real time among them of what's happening in it's very different to a conventional way of telling a story, because it's happening in that moment. It's unfolding in ways that you may have a rough guide of how you want it to go, but you can't predict exactly how it's all going to turn out. A lot of games use randomizers anyway, but even if you take all the randomizers out of a role-playing game, you take out all the dice, you take out all the cards, the interactions between people, the sudden ideas, the twists, the turns they give their characters, you can't predict how that's going to pan out. And the story that comes out of that is new and unique. and something no one beforehand has completely foreseen. Even if the Games Master has a strong idea of how the scenes of this are going to go, they can never tell exactly how it's going to play out. So if that's fan fiction, then fan fiction is pretty damn cool. It's a lot of fun, and it creates amazing in the moment experiences. And surprises and twists and turns that no one has really seen coming. There's a fourth layer to it then as well, which does veer more into the conventional fan fiction element there, which is obviously the aftermath. Is how people tell other people about the games they've had. A bit of a meme or a stereotype about a gamer is going, "Let me tell you about my character." It's true though. People talk to each other about the games they've played in, and they tell stories derived from those moments in the fiction at the table. And these stories are themselves new information. They're new stories. They're this person's perspective on what happened, what they thought was great, what they thought was awesome. And that in a way is closest to conventional fan fiction, because it is someone sort of taking their idea of it and turning it around, from a different perspective and telling you about it. But if you listen to someone telling you about this awesome game they once played in which these amazing things happened, and people get so animated and enthused, it really matters to them. And that itself is, like I said, it's the sort of the final form of storytelling, of many layers of storytelling that comes out of role-playing games. So if that's fan fiction, I'm happy to be a fan fiction writer,
Yeah. Awesome. Great answer. So it's quite a collaborative way of telling stories. And I mean, how much collaboration is there at the production end of that? Those many layers.
It varies a lot, and it depends on the kind of game you're trying to make and who's involved. Some games, or indie games, they've got very small numbers of people contributing. Maybe it could just be one person doing the entire writing. They have a core idea, they know how they're going to do it, they create it. So the collaboration there is just purely in their own mind. But then they put it out there for people to play with, and that's when it all kicks off. And that when you put a game out there, you're instantly getting feedback that you can fold back into it. If you publish a novel, obviously it's out there and you can change it later, but it's not really such an iterative process. But with games, you can put an early model out there and go, guys, I'm making a game really niche. It's about how people feel. It's a game about feelings of isolation at Christmas and how you come to that and people meeting about. That sounds odd, but there are indie games that are hyper narrow, exploring this kind of interesting space of specific feelings, specific emotions, specific settings. And you throw it out there and it comes back and people play and they go, well, it doesn't really feel I'm not getting that Christmas vibe, and you can take it back and you can fill it and throw it back out there. If you're working as a 1 or 2 man band, you can get that very rapid iterative process with playtesters going. And with sort of the communities going, bigger companies or bigger operations are generally keeping that more internal, and it's very collaborative because you have large numbers of people writing a book. And you need them to talk to each other. Otherwise, you get a kind of stitched together monstrosity where clearly 10 people were all writing slightly different interpretations of what's going on. So just as a sort of example, book for books that I'm developing at the moment, a process I'm using, I would be a developer on a book, and this would involve either a game idea or book idea I've pitched to the company, or one that has been pitched by someone else and I've been asked to develop. And the first step of that is creating an outline. And a bit like, it's like creating a plot outline for a fiction book. In a way, you are mapping out what's going to be in this product. And there's 2 elements to that. There's the actual skeleton itself. Obviously, there's chapter 1, it's going to be about this place. Chapter 2 is about the game mechanics relating to that. Chapter 3 is this and that. The other element, though, is all about theme, tone, mood, what the writers have to be doing and not be doing. This is the point where you remind them to talk to each other. But it's also where you say things like, don't write massively offensive racist stuff, please, or don't, or keep this thing in mind. Don't all these elements of advice that go into the mix. It's project management of the writing team, but it's also this kind of collaboration on creating this book, and then you're putting out to the writers. And a lot of what I'm working on is there's not a straitjacket on the writers. We're not saying you have to write this bit of stuff and every detail of this is already in another book somewhere and you have to conform to 7 other books in the line. If you're putting weapon mechanics in, you have to have all 17 types of spear from a book 3 years ago. It's nothing like that. It's a case of, hey, write me cool occult horror about sorcerers in the modern age, and I want you to write the bit that's set in Bulgaria, all right? Well, this is a book about European sorcerers, and you're going to be doing the bit about Bulgaria, okay? So what I want is a well-researched piece that draws on real-world occult folklore and sensitively ties it in. Now, you're doing Hungarian occult stuff, okay? And so I would also like you to talk to each other if there's any, overlap. So you're kind of getting, what you want to do is get the writers all chatting, batting ideas around. Someone goes, I've got this cool idea, but I can't fit it into anything that in my section. Does anyone else want to use it? And threads grow from that. In the best books, threads grow from those communications and those collaborations into interpretations of the theme and the mood that you've set out into the outline that now run in a concrete form through the book. When the writers take hold of a manifestation they've thought up of, well, this is a great way we can show this theme, and then they thread it onto each other, and they talk to it, and they build this sort of up from the ground up. So and from if you like, a practical point of view, often there's playtesting, there's proofreading, editing, playtesting stages, which are about banging the draft into more solid shape, both from a readability stage, but also from a playability stage. There's no point having the most beautifully written role-playing game book if everyone reads it and goes, this makes no sense. The actual rules of the game don't work. So you get collaboration there with that being battered forth. And one of the roles of a developer or whatever other role is managing the book is to take feedback and obviously feed it back to the writers and get them to, like an editor for a fiction novel, get that back to a writer in a way that they're going to take on board and act or in a way that's going to be constructive. You don't want to go back to someone who's painstakingly written 10,000 words of intricate rules on something you've asked them to do and go, sorry, it's crap. These guys say it's rubbish. Just fix it. That's not helpful to anyone. You need to come back to them and say, here are some specific problems we've run into. We like what you've done here, but this needs fixing. Talk to this other writer to make sure your section's into it, and guide and then you need to actually guide the writer to do that as well, not just leave them to it and leave them hanging. So role-playing game books of any size are collaborative projects that require a lot of management, essentially. It's sometimes, if you like, you've had rock star writers, if you like, writers with great cachet in communities, who are the kinds who you've had a publisher go, just go away and write me 100,000 words of game and we'll publish it, But that's not generally how it works. No. Generally, it's a case of you are part of a group and you are all contributing together towards making this thing real and realizing it. So, yeah, I think it has to be, and this is a very small work, it has to be collaborative at every level to make a functional product at the end of it, a functional piece of work for someone to read and enjoy and play with and think and sort of enrich their lives with.
What most often comes first, building the system or creating the creative around that?
There isn't really a single answer to that because the scope of games is so big. A lot of the time, especially with licenses, obviously you have someone going licensing an existing property, so if you like, the setting has already kind of come first, which then means that people creating the game are going, right, well, how do we make a game that best delivers the setting? So they're working on the mechanics first, but the setting, that's only because the setting's already there. A lot of games are created because someone has a cool idea and they go, I want to play revolutionary France, but instead of aristocrats, they're vampires, right? That's got a bit, and then you need to actually make that setting actually a setting you can build the mechanics for, so you know what you're building mechanics for. You need to at least have a skeleton of the themes that you want to deliver in play. Otherwise, you're going to create an incoherent mess. I personally, as a game designer, have ended up in situations where my involvement with the project is mechanics first, because that's what I specifically have been hired to do. I created some for a British folk horror game recently where, while there's a very brief outline of the setting overall, a whole chunk of the writers were working on the scenarios of play, and I was writing the rules mechanics entirely separately and by myself, which is an interesting thing because I knew enough about obviously what we were doing, what we were aiming for, to make a set of mechanics that would support horror scenarios. But my experience was a bit different to my usual one, where I was basically creating and iterating rules and game systems and chucking old ones out, bringing new ones in, because the client had quite a specific idea of the play experience they wanted with these rules, from a rules perspective, but they didn't know how the rules should work. So I was showing them, saying, we've probably got a problem here. Yeah, okay, we'll change that, and I'm taking back to myself again, rewriting to a slightly new system. Back out. What's the problem now? Back to me, rewrite again. So it's about 3 iterations of very intensive rules writing. And I had almost no interaction directly with the fiction writing itself. Obviously, I was trying to keep the people who were writing the setting and fiction scenarios updated as the changes, so they knew what they were supposed to be folding into their scenarios. But so generally, I think generally setting will be coming first. The real exceptions to that are what are called the generic systems. A lot of role-playing games are about a specific media tie-in or a theme or a kind of cool idea, but you do get some role-playing games that are, you can use this for anything. You can use this role-playing game for knights in armor, science fiction, modern urban action, like GURPS, the generic universal role-playing system, and Fate and things like that. And I suppose for them, there is that element of the rules coming first, because that's primarily what you're getting. You are getting a toolkit. You're getting a rules toolkit to build everything else off of.
Yeah,
that's not to say, even if you do go setting first, that the rules are thrown back. One of the big games of recent decades is Apocalypse World and the Powered by the Apocalypse systems, which was quite a big paradigm shift in terms of how the rules mechanics support the themes and mood in play. It worked quite differently to how a lot of previous games worked, and it's had a massive impact on design since, and it's created all sorts of inspired games using those same mechanics, adapting them. And while Apocalypse World is obviously a game about playing in a post-apocalyptic setting, in no way are the mechanics for that a kind of a secondary thought. They're absolutely the core. They're at the core of everything the game does, is about how do you use the mechanics to support this setting in play at every moment, and really reshaping it in that respect. So a bit of a waffling answer on that one, because it's a bit of a messy. It's just sort of a bit of a messy topic due to the rather messy nature of the industry.
Do you think there is a sort of feedback loop for you as a developer and a gamer, in that one has improved the other for you, and does it go both ways?
Yes. Ish. So as a developer and as a writer, I find playing these games enormously important. There are people who do a minimum, who don't really play the games they write very much, but for me it's vital, both from ultimately, how better am I going to know how the game plays and what the issues are and what is great about them if I'm not actually playing them? I can write anything on a bit of paper. I can throw out whatever's in my brain for a new idea for a game mechanic, or a way we're going to implement this cool thematic thing in play. But I don't ultimately know for sure what's going to happen when it hits play with a bunch of people, especially people who aren't me. And so for me, I think playing is vital to developing and writing. It's not sort of complete. You can write. There are games people create that are not intended to be played, and it sounds odd, but there are, again, the explosion of game design on social media and it's been incredible. It's created a dizzying array of types of games, and there are some people call it lyric games, where the message is really in the game, in the writing of the game, and how it makes you think as you read it. And if it doesn't work in play, that's not really the point, Those are quite rare, obviously. But generally, for me, I think playing is important to understanding games and making you a better developer, a better writer. Conversely, being a games writer does not make you a better player. For various reasons and at various levels. I mean, it can do as a knock-on effect. Like if you are studying a lot of games systems to understand the mechanics, and you're learning about why people are using the mechanics they are, and you're understanding how this kind of stuff unfolds at the table, then you can take that information and improve your play at table. You might be sitting down going, oh yeah, actually, I think the reason why I'm finding this not very satisfying, this game I'm playing, is because the spotlight time for the players is all skewed, and the game's mechanics are dumping all the stuff on this player, really, or I'm having a hell of a time running this game as a games master because I don't like the workload it's giving me as the GM, or that kind of thing. So doing stuff can expand, if rigorously reading around can expand your perspective and your perception of how games should and can be played. But you don't have to be a games writer or designer to do that. You can just read all these games anyway if you're a keen gamer, and walk away from it going, actually, these are cool ideas. I think writing games and designing games expands your understanding of game design, unsurprisingly, and can help you even further. But I don't think in the moment-to-moment aspects of playing it, it necessarily means you are going to be better. And that's quite hard for me to sort of quantify, because it's the full gamut from, if you're an asshole, right, and you're writing great games, but you're still an asshole to deal with at table, no one's going to want to play with you, no matter how great the games you're writing are, all the way to, you may just have already found the thing in games you really like and that makes you happy, and the kind of character you like to play, the kind of action you enjoy. And then you're writing these other games that sort of put what you like into play, but it's not changing what you like. So if you're already happy with your games and you feel you're in the right place, then there's no sort of eternal treadmill of being a better player. Ultimately, as a player, what matters is, are you walking away from that table feeling satisfied and happy? I'm not going to say enjoyment, because some games aren't necessarily enjoyable in the moment, but they can be. You can walk away from going, that was intense and that was good. And the other aspect of this is, were the other people at the table walking away from it satisfied with how it went? And I don't think you need to be a game designer to play or run great games. No,
definitely. And certainly in the games that we played, the werewolf game in particular, that was such an intense experience. And not every session was a barrel of laughs, although most of them were. But the story was very dark. Obviously, it's a personal horror themed game, so it was very dark and intense. And there were some, tearful moments and some angry moments, and it was. But what a bonding experience as well.
Absolutely, and it was memorable. It really had an impact. I'm going to borrow a term that for me originated from live action role play. So live action role play, for those that don't know, is the bit one where you dress up as your characters and you go in a field with your fake weapons and you play your wizards and your sorcerers and all that. I'm only saying it slightly mockingly because I really enjoy it, and I think LARP is great. There's a term from that I experienced from there, but it is relevant in tabletop role playing, called bleed. People can get really into their characters in the moment of it. Especially LARP is often about very intense stuff. Empire is politicking, socializing, all sorts of philosophy, as well as violence and war. And people get into character like a character actor, like certain actor really getting into their persona, and they play that character. And you want to maintain careful lines in your behavior and what you're doing, that you always understand it's a game, but you can walk away from intense situations with those feelings bleeding over from the character to yourself, and that happens in tabletop as well. And it can be pretty heavy going. If you play through a scenario with some really intense material, either because it relates to the history of the game and your characters within it, or because it's material that you personally find very evocative in some way, good or bad, and you can walk away from a table going, I need to chill, I need to wind down, I need to let this out. And it's intense, and it's something people often intentionally seek out with these games, and it's one of the reasons they play them, is they want to feel those kind of perspectives and impressions and stuff, often in a relatively safe environment. Just to say like that, I've got a laundry list of phobias, thalassophobia one. I'm terrified of deep water and things in them. I actually quite like it when people running games put water related horror stuff in there, because it works very effectively on me, but I know that it's not real. It's not going to. So for me, that's very effective at evoking a real sense of fear and horror. It's why people watch horror movies, because they want to be scared. That said, something very important in role-playing games in recent years that's really been pushed forward and very thoroughly approved is what's called safety tools in gaming. Because it used to be there was no real thought of that, but now people say, think about what your players can and can't handle. Get their consent for stuff that's going to be intense or is material that they might have difficulties with. Figure out safety tools at the table, so that if someone's actually going, okay, this is actually going places I don't really want to have to deal with, especially in today's world with a lot of stresses and strains on everybody. There's ways they can go, red flag, let's just not quite go that way, shall we? And I think it's part of the maturity of the medium of games is those tools being put in, that the acceptance is that yes, games can evoke these really strong feelings, and that can be great, but if you're going to play with that kind of intensity, you need to have the tools to do so in a way that everyone's happy with and everyone's safe with. And there has been a backlash to that, because obviously plenty of people go, I don't need safety tools in my games. And then you're fine, you don't need them, but plenty of people do want them and do use them, and I think it's a very good development to let everyone engage in these games in a way that they're going to get the most out of them, and they're going to get some of these potentially intense experiences without feeling unsafe. Or there's plenty of gamer horror stories about people joining awful groups, where people act like real, again, assholes. I don't know how much I can swear on this podcast.
You're fine. Carry on.
Complete fucking wankers, who will put people through, who will basically bully people through the games, and and that's something too many people have had an experience of, and it's something that obviously we don't want to happen at all. So for me, that's been a very interesting development in the last few years, is that really coming to the fore, and people talking a lot more about how to play these games safely in a way to get the most out of them, without feeling ultimately at risk, or minimizing the chances of people playing in dare I say an abusive way, exploiting games for an opportunity to be assholes to people.
Yeah. So you mentioned LARPing, and so I just want to go into that a little bit. How does creating a live action role playing game plot differ from writing a book?
A live action role playing game, it's so different from writing for a book. It's really different from writing for a role playing game. It's crazy, because it is a situation where you put a plot out there and you rapidly lose any control over what the players do with it. So it would be like saying, I've got this idea for a book, right? Okay, and there's going to be this hobbit with this ring, and you walk into the room of a rowdy teenage, and you go, okay, hobbit with a ring. What the fuck happens next? And just let them just go bananas with it, and they're running off, and soon the hobbit is set fire to Mount Doom, is riding velociraptors, and telling everybody that actually Sauron is the good guy, and they're or whatever. It's bizarre, because with a fest LARP, which is the kind of LARP I'm running for, you have upwards of 1,000 people in a field, all playing characters, politicking and maneuvering, and you are putting out there some what are called NPCs, some basic acted roles from the cast and crew, with some essentially instigating events or instigating things to kick the conflict off, and then it goes wild. So you might go, well, you're playing the high and mighty of this grand empire. Well, here are the ambassadors from one rival nation who want you to sell out this other rival nation for, here is a big bag of gold. And then you send on the NPCs from the other one. The ambassador's going, well, yeah, but could you actually scroll on these guys? And within 24 hours, there will be people on the field swearing blind the complete opposite of what the NPCs have been telling people. And you as a game runner will have no idea if they are doing it because they are being clever and manipulative and they're trying to lead all the other players off the trail of the plot that they are trying to control, or if they genuinely believe this. Messages go around the field, and by the time they come back to you, they're completely the opposite of how they started. So basically, creating a plot for this, really what it's all about is it's about creating something that will have the most impact for the most players. Which doesn't mean every plot has to be massive, but rather that for the effort you put in, you want it to be, if you've got 1,000 people in the field, you don't want a plot that just affects 2 people and they're never going to tell anyone about. That's a lot of effort from the plot team with props and acting crew and all that for no great effect. But you want it to stir knock-on effects. And that could be conflict. That could just be making people think about something that maybe they haven't thought about before, and folding it, and how do they think of other things. If everyone goes, oh, actually, this forest of magical butterflies is a major source of our crushed magical butterfly pigment for our magical weapons, is under threat. Actually, that changes how we've got to think about how this whole war front works, because suddenly we can't supply all the soldiers with magic weapons anymore. And that might, in plot, just be someone going on to tell someone else who has a keen thing about magic butterflies, going, I've got to tell you, man, there's a blight ripping through this forest. Can you find a wizard who can cure it? And that's a very small plot in terms of the direct people involved. But then it ripples out and they're going, oh, there's blights out there. What's the knock-on effects going to be? And someone who wants that whole war front to crumble is there going, screw them, curse the forest more, kill all the butterflies. How can we do this? Just from you saying that there's a problem with some completely imaginary butterflies that will never appear in the field, but is in this theoretical fiction of the world that the people are apparently supposed to be concerned about. So you put stuff out there, you want to create conflict, you want to create knock-on effects, you want to create the most game for the most people. But you don't plot out an arc because you can't. You cannot say, we're going to do this thing with the butterflies and the players are going to heroically deal with it. And then the evil butterfly lord is going to turn up next time as the next up, because the players might turn out to just blow the whole forest up. They might go, we're burning it. We don't want the blight to spread. And in a good LARP, you're facilitating a lot of these options for the players to do responsively to the world. So it's so wildly different. You plot your plot of a novel or a book or a piece of fiction. You're working out what's going to happen. Whereas this is just setting the cat amongst the pigeons and seeing what the feathers left afterwards and going, okay, what do we build off this now? Okay, the players burned down the forest of butterflies. Well, what does this mean? Impact. Firstly, it's completely screwed the magical butterfly pigment production, right? But also there's a bunch of angry peasants going, someone just burnt down our source of timber, and you build off iteratively like that. In a way, I suppose what would be the closest thing in fiction to it is that collaborative, when one person writes a chapter, hands it on to the next person writes a chapter, that kind of thing, because you just cannot tell what is going to come out the other end of it, and that's why it's fantastic. It does mean sometimes you'll put what you've crafted, a lovingly crafted a plot about, rival feuding ex-lovers in these knightly houses who want to gather supporters for their cause from different factions of the field, and you put it out there and it sinks like a trace and nobody cares. And that itself is an opportunity, because you might have them come back later going, well, since you all spurned us, we went and hired all these mercenaries and, or whatever. But sometimes also you have to be very ready with these plots to cut them. And go, it didn't work. The players aren't interested. Well, let's go and create something else they are interested in. Obviously in a novel, you can't, if you've been laying down long-running plot threads for something momentous, if you drop it, all the readers are going to go, hold on, there's a plot hole here. But in a field of 1,000 people, they don't care. If it wasn't interesting to them in the first place, then they're probably not ever going to remember it. So it's a bit chaotic. It's a bit kind of, it's straight cat herding, basically.
Yeah, which is rather what it's like trying to get writers to agree to do something. Yeah. Okay, so you do also write fiction. So talk to me a bit about what you're working on now. Okay.
This is a bit tricky. I have to, because the main fiction I'm writing on now is a tie-in novel for a game line, Trinity Continuum. I'm allowed to say I'm doing that. The details, certain details I can't tell you because they're under NDA, which is, I suppose, an aspect rolling back very briefly to the other question of what's it like to work with licenses and things. Is sometimes, you obviously most writers aren't going to be out there going, well, I'm halfway through a book and I want to tell you the whole plot. But at the same time, it's a bit with this. It's a bit more. I've signed documents and things that mean I've got to keep quiet about certain things. It probably helps that I haven't finished writing the first draft yet, so there's some things I can't tell you yet because I haven't hammered them all out. So the thing I'm writing, like, on a day-to-day basis, my current priority is writing this draft. So I'm doing a first draft of this, and this for me goes quite interesting. Raises some interesting questions. I'm writing this tie-in novella, 40,000 words, for a science fiction setting. I'm also working on that line in the game as a game designer and writer, so I'm very familiar with it. But for me, tie-in fiction has a very interesting question that I can't really say I know the answer to yet, which is, to what extent should you write it as if you are writing something new? And what I mean by that is, if you pick up a Star Wars time fiction book and you read it, and there's a Jedi with lightsaber. You know what a Jedi with lightsaber is. They don't need to go, this is what a Jedi is, this is what a lightsaber is. There's that attached cultural signifiers. People know it, but the question is, but should you anyway? There's a certain amount of show don't tell as a guideline for that a lot of writers follow anyway. But if I am writing a book about a setting with these psychic heroes. Do I need to, early on in this, when I'm describing what is going on, do I need to say, this is what a scion is? You know, or do I assume that the people picking up this book, this tie-in book, which is being released, in this case, it's a Kickstarter stretch goal, thing, fulfillment, that they probably know this stuff already, because they're people buying tie-in fiction for a game line.
Yeah.
You know, so there's that element of how familiar do you assume readers are going to be with it? How free do you feel to just go with it and go, oh, no, they know what this is, and or to go, actually, I should lay that out. And one of the ways, for me, there's questions of perspective. From the character's perspective is going to affect that, because if you're looking from a first-person perspective, you're writing in that, then what the character thinks about these things is going to be a bit more, I suppose, natural flow-wise. Or are you writing third person, and then is it a bit omniscient narrator suddenly blocking in a chunk of text about how there are 8 psi orders in the world, breaking up the types of psionic power and this, that, and the other. So yeah, that's one of the things that's sort of bugging me at the moment, and I don't have an answer to it. It's just something I've been knocking around in my head a lot for that. But other than that, in this case, it's a fairly, for me, what I would consider a fairly, my just as a warning, my internet connection is apparently unstable. So if I suddenly start jolting, juddering, or crackling, the thing's pinged up, then that'll be why. Okay. So for me, it's been fairly conventional writing process. So my approach generally is, I've, like many writers, I've tried different ways of plotting and planning, writing out books. And the one I generally fall on to for this kind of thing is, I will work through a rough idea of what I'm doing in very broad strokes, and then I will write, and the writing will fill out and produce some surprising details as I go. And I may then need to work back through that and write them back in, just in a first draft, not in general revisions. Some people, they will do loads of details and plan it, and then exactly what happens. Fine, I don't know exactly what's going to happen. I've accidentally introduced an extra antagonist who actually makes complete sense. So I'm glad I did it, but I didn't think about that in the beginning. And now I know, and okay, that kind of works. So it's for me, it's writing something like this is like discovering it as I go, to some extent.
Yeah.
I'm going to learn stuff about the character, and I'm going to learn stuff about what's going on a bit beyond what I've already planned, and that's pretty great. The thing with something like this is obviously I'm writing it to production company deadlines.
Yeah.
So it actually follows the exact same process, more or less, as any other role-playing game book that I'm doing for this company would. That is to say, there's an outline, which is done by me in this case, and then I'm writing it. And these phases of drafts, editing, development, and drafts are just as if it was a role-playing game book, except the people doing this are, they are writers themselves, and they are familiar with fiction works and doing this. But it's kind of interesting just to follow exactly the same template as if I was writing some other book for some other game product. In that respect, that's the big thing there that I'm working on. Fiction wise at the moment, I have some ideas from short story fiction that I'm always trying to find. The problem I have with short story fiction is I have a very strong idea for it pop up, and I should write this, and I have no time to write it. And by the time I have time to write it, I'll have no enthusiasm for it, and I'll have a new short story idea instead. I am working long term on building the outline for the rough sketch for a sort of novel length manuscript for something that I would guess I title sort of a weird fiction sort of setting. For quite a while, I've written a lot of body horror in some of the game lines I've been writing for, and I enjoy it. I'm incredibly squeamish, but I like writing body horror. I hate watching films with it in, but I like writing it. And so for this, the part that was inspired for this, I thought, why don't I just turn some of this stuff into? Why don't I just write quite a body horror-ific full-length manuscript of fiction? So I'm currently planning that out, plotting it out. It's very slow going, just tapping away at it from time to time. And the problem for me with this kind of my own fiction, if you like, fiction that isn't tying into an IP or that isn't part something I am being paid already to write, because the advantage of the time fiction I'm writing is I have a contract that will pay me set amounts at set times and stuff. So it's nice to have money and food on the table. And other stuff, if I'm not getting paid, the only person who is pushing me to do is me. And so that's always tricky. Just if you have a schedule full of other writing, finding the creative time and energy to spare for something that is something I want to do, but it doesn't have that necessary immediate return, is difficult. And something certainly I've found is that with what is essentially not quite an idea, it's freelance, but something of a day job of writing, including currently writing fiction, to order, if you like, is that it doesn't leave me an awful lot of energy for writing, for my own creative energy outside of that work. And that is a risk. As I said before, you can get burned out. You can feel, that you need time and distance from something to appreciate it again, which I'm hoping is not going to happen again, that I won't need time. But I have increasingly found I need to be stricter with myself about enforcing time off and time away from stuff, and just hard limiting, going, no, I have to take a holiday now. As I found recently, I went very brief, holiday recently just to go and visit a parent, and then back again. But even that alone was just enough of not sitting in the same room in front of the same laptop every day, just to break that monotony and give you a bit more energy to crack on with it. And it was what I needed. And I've now been cracking on with this current manuscript, playing through it much, much faster than I was before. I was really struggling. So mental stuff is really important to this, to my mind. So I'm wildly off topic at this point.
No, it's fine.
So yeah, I mean, from a writing point of view, I've got my hands full with everything I've got to do. And there comes a point, as every writer knows, there comes a point you've just got to do the bloody writing. It's the hard bit,
Yeah.
You've just got to sit down and make the words happen on the page.
So I could talk to you for hours and hours, but we have been talking for an hour now, so I think we'll maybe start to wrap things up. I do have a question from one of our patrons. Joe asks, how do you work across so many mediums and manage to keep it all straight in your head? Is it as simple as just doing one thing at a time?
That obviously it varies a lot how much I have to do at one time. I'm a freelancer technically, so I work on a contract basis, and sometimes I will not have an awful lot of contracts to deal with, and there'll be one book relating to one, license, one line, one IP, and that's fine. And the other time you have 5 deadlines breathing down your neck, and they're all for different game lines. I focus on one thing at a time. I'm not trying to write 3 different documents at once at the exact same moment. But I mean, the tricky thing is, with a lot of these, you do need to reference a wider body of fiction or established lore for a game, and rules. If I'm writing a book for Eon in the Trinity Continuum, I need to know the Trinity Continuum system rules. I need to know what's been written for Eon. I need to make sure I don't cross-reference that. To some extent, that's the developer's job to pick up if I make a mistake, but there shouldn't be many mistakes reaching the developer if I'm a good writer, right? And that, it's funny, I don't have a massive issue with that. I'm quite good at just switching between systems. I can keep a lot of game systems in my head, and I can switch between them fairly easily, even fairly similar ones, which obviously Holly will understand this, but might sound a bit weird to other people when I say the difference between the Chronicles of Darkness and the World of Darkness system, for example, right? A lot of writers do struggle if they're working between 2 of them to keep the 2 separate, and you start getting mistakes creeping from one to the other of very slightly different rule systems. For me, that's not really a problem. Just the way my mind categorizes things, I guess. At times where there is a bit of where there's a lot of pressure on me and a lot of deadlines breathing down my neck, and I need to keep things separate, I'm fortunate in that the different games and things I'm working on are very different in nature most of the time. An optimistic science fiction space opera setting and a blood and guts intense personal horror urban setting, they're just so different that I don't really get them. If I'm writing for one day, I'm writing for the other, I'm not really feeling the mix up. There's also the element that for me, the best writing has common underlying elements. Whatever you're writing for, it's about writing material that is dripping with use gameability, story from a structural point of view. You're looking at material that has hooks. It has to be evocative, regardless of whether you're talking about vampires or aliens. It has to have stuff that is going to appeal to people from a playing level, going, oh, I can see this being something I want in my game, or this makes me think about how I would play this, or how we bring this to the table. So I think the skill set being obviously the same kind of thing underneath means it's fairly easy to switch from one to the other from my point of view. But generally, how do I keep it separate? Yeah, I work on different things at different times, work on very different things in general. So you're not just writing slight variations of the same thing on a dozen different game lines. If only because, I mean, you'd get bored. By the time you're rehashing the same themes for the fifth time for a slightly different game, you probably wouldn't be very interested in what you're writing anyway. And if you're not interested in what you're writing, it tends to show through in the writing. You know, it's quite, I'm not going to say it's quite, if you write a game, it is relatively, it is a trapful into a way you can be phoning it in, right? But it does show if you do that, because it's the kind of thing where you can sometimes get the same sort of structure things going. Go, oh well, this is another game. I can just write the same kind of material rehashed, but it just shows, and you're not going to get very far with that. So, for me, the enthusiasm for it helps me keep things separate, and the very unhelpful answer of, I guess it's just the way my mind works. Which I apologize, it's not more applicable for other people, but I just don't have if you give me a bunch of stuff like, oh, you need to fix the wiring in the shower switch and you need to get that bit thing repainted and get the grouting changed, I'm like, it's too many things, I can't handle them all. But if you tell me to master the 5 different game systems and wildly various, I'm like, yeah, that's not a problem, I can do that.
Excellent. So we have one final question, which we ask all of the guests on the Great Writer Share, which is, why do you write?
I would go more barking mad if I didn't. Or I just do. I mean, when I have worked long periods of time at places that are not very creative and give me the creative outlet, I then end up writing, because the ideas just cram themselves into my head and they're going to go somewhere, right? And eventually I'll have the time and I'll start writing them out. Why do I write? Because it's just kind of what I do. Again, it's a bit of a cop-out answer, but for me, it's a very meaningful and powerful outlet for the chaos that's in my head. I spend a lot of time in my head one way or another, and writing puts that out of my head. It lets me take things out of my head and take them out of that chaos. I also write because I am massively, massively eager for validation. And I enormously enjoy it when I put something out for a game and someone goes, oh, this is really cool. That's what it's because I crave that kind of positive reinforcement. It's probably not healthy, but regardless, that is a major thing for me, is that element of just the joy of having people go, this is cool. And the even greater joy of people going, I had these great moments with this, this had an impact on me.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm a glutton for praise, vain, egotistical, and needy. That's why I write.
Brilliant. Best answer ever. Thank you. Okay, we have come to the rapid fire round. 10 questions. Don't overthink. Are you ready?
Okay. Yes.
Tabletop or LARP? Go.
Tabletop.
Favorite sci-fi?
Oh, Jesus. Literally, I've just had a car crash in my head of various different things, and I can't pick any of them out right now. Wow, that's... I don't know. I generally, I can't pick one. I'm sorry, I'm trying to process too many thoughts in my head, and none of them are coming to the front. A lot
you can
of different
pass.
sci-fis.
It's okay.
Yep.
Pass. Okay. The last book that made you laugh?
What's the last book that made... Okay, I am... so my eldest daughter is a huge reader. She reads loads of stuff at the moment. But I am reading... I'm still reading a bedtime story to her every night. And I'm currently reading some series about the School for Good and Evil or something. And it was one of the books now. It's aimed at kids, but let's face it, adult writers often put genuinely funny things that the adults will appreciate in them as well. I think something in that made me laugh not that long ago.
Okay. Sweet or savoury?
Savoury.
How many languages do you speak?
Define speak. Because
can hold theory, a brief conversation.
Very brief conversation, at least 3.
Okay. One thing from your bucket list?
Yeah, I'd like to go back to my country of birth and visit again, Thailand.
Mm-hmm. A word that makes you cringe.
Oh, Jesus. Nope, pass. I'm just blanking again.
Okay. Favourite season?
I think autumn, but it's it's a close run thing with spring.
Okay. Cats or dogs?
Cats.
Scariest game you've ever played?
I am a massive coward. So most scary games, like quite. I mean, I've played quite a few, and I'll be honest, all of them. If it's a scary game with jump scares, then I am probably cowering behind my chair.
Wonderful. That's 10 questions. Thank you very much. One final bonus question. Where can our listeners find out more about you and your work?
Okay, well, I am on Twitter at Acrozatarim, which people always like, what, the what, the who, the how do you spell that?
Yeah, send me it in written form and I'll put it in the show notes.
I am often floating around some of the gaming forums like RPGNet and Onyx Path Publishing's forums, and increasingly Discord channels as well. And I am currently streaming a Well for Forsaken role-playing game, Chronicle, sort of ongoing game, which my friends at Paleo Gaming on Twitch, who usually do computer games, but one of them's playing it, so they're streaming that for me, and that's happening most weekends. We finished the first season. We're gearing up for the second season, the second story arc of that at the moment, it's called Very Angry Dogs. It's about a pack of American werewolves in deepest, darkest Dorset, dealing with occult horror, paranoia, and extreme culture shock. I mean that's pretty much it for my internet presence, I think.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Chris. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Lovely to be here. Thank you very much, Holly.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Great Writers Share podcast. Tune in next week when Dan will be interviewing Paul Michael Anderson. Don't forget, you can catch up on our entire backlist of episodes, plus get all of the backstage access, our Slack channel and more by joining our Patreon from as little as $1 a month. Find out more at patreon.com/Great Writers Share. Until next time.